December 27, 1942, Port Moresby, New Guinea. The morning sun had barely broken through the tropical haze when Second Lieutenant Richard Ira Bong climbed into the cockpit of his P-38 Lightning for his first combat mission. His hands were steady, his breathing calm, but his mind raced with thoughts that would prove prophetic. The Japanese have ruled these skies for a year. Today, that begins to change. Through the plexiglass canopy, Bong watched as 40 Japanese aircraft materialized from the clouds, bombers escorted by the legendary Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters that had terrorized Allied pilots across the Pacific. The odds were impossibly stacked against the 12 American P-38s scrambling to intercept. What the Japanese pilots did not know, could not have known, was that among those 12 Americans flew a farm boy from Wisconsin who would become their worst nightmare. A pilot whose name would soon be whispered with dread in Japanese, briefing rooms from Rabaul to the Philippines. The mathematics of aerial warfare were about to be rewritten, not through technology alone, though the twin-engine Lightning was revolutionary, not through tactics alone, though American fighter doctrine was evolving rapidly, but through the emergence of one pilot whose combination of natural ability, analytical precision, and fearless aggression would shatter every assumption the Japanese held about American fighter pilots. Richard Bong had arrived in the Pacific Theater. The Japanese Imperial Navy Air Service would never be the same. The collapse of Japanese air superiority began not with a dramatic proclamation, but with 2 kills on that humid morning over Buna. Bong, flying with Captain Thomas Lynch and the 39th Fighter Squadron, engaged the massive Japanese formation with methodical precision. His first victim was a Zero, the supposedly invincible fighter that had swept Allied aircraft from Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor. His second was a Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar, another feared Japanese fighter. For these 2 victories, Bong received the Silver Star. But the award citation could not capture what Japanese pilots experienced that day. Among them was Petty Officer First Class Hiroshi Nakamura, whose after-action report, discovered in Japanese archives decades later, revealed the first cracks in Japanese confidence. The American twin-engine fighters attacked with coordination we had not seen before. One pilot, flying aircraft number unknown, demonstrated skills equal to our most experienced aces. He did not attempt to dogfight in the manner of previous American pilots. He used his aircraft's strengths, speed, and altitude to dictate the terms of engagement. This troubled us greatly. The journey from Wisconsin farm boy to America's deadliest fighter pilot had begun years earlier, shaped by circumstances that seemed unremarkable until viewed through the lens of what was to come. Born September 24, 1920 in Superior, Wisconsin, Richard Ira Bong was the eldest of 9 children born to Swedish immigrant Carl Bong and his wife Dora. The family farm in Poplar offered a modest life, but one rich in the values that would define Bong's character. As a child, young Dick Bong witnessed something that changed his trajectory forever. In 1928, President Calvin Coolidge spent his summer vacation in Superior. The mail planes that served the presidential vacation home flew directly over the Bong farm. I knew then I wanted to be a pilot. Bong would later recall in letters to his family. I built model airplanes from scrap wood and paper. I studied every aviation magazine I could find. Flying was not a dream. It was destiny. But what truly shaped Bong was the discipline of farm life and the expectations of Swedish immigrant parents who valued hard work above all else. He excelled academically, graduating 10th in his class of 428 Gs, 8 students at Superior Central High School. He played baseball, basketball, and hockey. He sang in the church choir. He hunted in Wisconsin's forests, developing marksmanship skills that would prove critical in aerial combat. Most importantly, he learned patience, observation, and the analytical thinking that would separate him from other pilots. In 1938, Bong enrolled at Superior State Teachers College with plans to become an engineer, but aviation called more strongly. He joined the civilian pilot training program, soloing on his 20th birthday in a Piper Cub. The instructors noted his natural ability immediately. He possessed what pilots call situational awareness, the ability to track multiple aircraft, calculate angles and speeds, and make split-second decisions while under extreme stress. On May 29, 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor, Bong enlisted in the Army Air Corps Aviation Cadet Program. One of his gunnery instructors at Luke Field, Arizona, was Captain Barry Goldwater, who would later serve as United States Senator from Arizona. Goldwater remembered Bong vividly in post-war interviews. "He was the finest natural pilot I ever met. In gunnery training, he could put rounds on target with precision that exceeded our best instructors, but what impressed me most was his analytical mind. He didn't just shoot. He calculated, adjusted, and learned from every training run." Another instructor, a P-38 Czech pilot whose name was lost to history, provided the assessment that would prove most accurate. "There is no way to keep Bong from getting on your tail. He flew an AT-6, one of the slowest training aircraft, yet he could position himself behind me flying a much faster plane. His understanding of three-dimensional aerial combat was instinctive." On January 9, 1942, 1 month after Pearl Harbor, Second Lieutenant Richard Ira Bong received his pilot wings and commission. His dream of flying was now reality. But instead of being sent to combat, his exceptional gunnery scores earned him a posting as instructor at Luke Field. For months, Bong trained other pilots while the war raged across the Pacific. The frustration was intense, but the experience would prove invaluable. Teaching others forced him to articulate tactics and techniques that came naturally to him. In May 1942, Bong received orders to Hamilton Field, California to train on the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. This twin-engine fighter, with its distinctive twin-boom design and central nacelle cockpit, was unlike anything most pilots had flown. Powered by two Allison V1710 engines producing 1,425 horsepower each, the Lightning could reach speeds of 414 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Armed with one 20mm cannon and four 50 caliber machine guns, all nose-mounted, the P-38 delivered devastating, concentrated firepower. But the Lightning was also complex and unforgiving. The counter-rotating propellers eliminated torque issues but created unique handling characteristics. The cockpit heating was inadequate for high-altitude flight. The controls were heavy at high speeds. Many pilots feared the aircraft. Bong loved it. He understood that the P-38's speed, climb rate, and long range made it the perfect weapon for Pacific combat, where engagements occurred over vast ocean distances. At Hamilton Field, Bong's natural flying ability manifested in ways that both impressed and alarmed his commanders. On June 12, 1942, he buzzed the house of a fellow pilot who had just married, flying so low that the propeller wash scattered debris across the yard. He also flew down Market Street in San Francisco at rooftop level and blew clothes off a woman's clothesline in Oakland with his propeller wash. General George C. Kenney, commanding the 4th Air Force, personally reprimanded Bong. The general's words would become legendary. "If you didn't want to fly down Market Street, I wouldn't have you in my Air Force. But you are not to do it anymore, and I mean what I say." Despite the stern words, Kenney recognized something special in the young pilot. "We needed kids like this lad," he would later write. Aggressive, fearless, skilled, the kind of pilot who would press the attack when others turned away. When General Douglas MacArthur selected Kenney to lead the 5th Air Force in the South Pacific, Kenney hand-picked 50 of the best P-38 pilots he knew to join him. Bong was one of them. In September 1942, the general and the farm boy arrived in Australia. The Pacific War was about to gain its most deadly aerial predator. The transformation from talented pilot to feared combat ace began with careful mentorship and combat exposure that built skills systematically. Bong was assigned to the 9th Fighter Squadron of the previous 49th Fighter Group, known as the Flying Knights. But the squadron was still flying Curtiss P-40 Warhawks, obsolete fighters no match for Japanese Zeros. Rather than waste time, General Kenney temporarily attached Bong to the 39th Fighter Squadron, 35th Fighter Group at Port Moresby, where he could fly missions while awaiting P-38 deliveries. This assignment proved critical. Flying under Captain Thomas Lynch, Bong learned from one of the Pacific's rising aces. Lynch was a tactician who understood that American pilots could not dogfight Zeros on equal terms. The Zero could outturn any Allied fighter at low to medium altitudes. Its lightweight construction gave it phenomenal maneuverability, but it paid a price in speed, armor protection, and structural strength. Lynch taught Bong the tactics that would define American fighter doctrine in the Pacific. Never attempt to turn fighter Zero. Use altitude advantage to initiate attacks. Dive at high speed. Deliver a concentrated burst of fire, then extend away using superior speed. If the first pass fails, climb back to altitude and reset for another attack. Never slow down in a Zero's engagement envelope. Bong absorbed these lessons and added his own innovations. He calculated deflection angles, lead distances, and closure rates with precision. Other pilots struggled to hit maneuvering targets. Bong understood that success required getting close, very close, close enough that missing became nearly impossible. December 27, 1942, provided Bong's baptism by fire. When 40 Japanese aircraft attacked Allied positions at Buna, 12 P-38s scrambled to intercept. The odds were more than 3-1 against the Americans. Most pilots would have exercised caution. Bong saw opportunity. Flying alongside Lynch, he positioned himself above the Japanese formation and dove into the attack with throttles wide open. His first target was a Zero attempting to engage Lynch's aircraft. Bong's side slipped, aligned his nose-mounted guns, and fired a short burst at close range. The Zero disintegrated in mid-air, pieces tumbling through the tropical sky. 3 more Zeros converged on Bong's position. He dove toward the jungle canopy, the pursuing fighters following. At what he later described as 2 inches above the shortest tree in Buna, Bong pulled out of his dive. The sudden maneuver loaded his airframe with tremendous G-forces, but the P-38's sturdy construction held. 2 of the pursuing Zeros could not match the maneuver and crashed into the jungle. But Bong was not finished. As he leveled out just above treetop height, he spotted an Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber pulling out of its attack run. The bomber was vulnerable, slow, loaded with ordnance. Bong closed to point-blank range and fired. The Val exploded in a massive fireball. Too low to climb, Bong headed back to Port Moresby at minimum altitude, his heart pounding, his mind already analyzing the engagement for lessons learned. That single combat produced 2 confirmed kills and earned Bong the Silver Star. But the real victory was psychological. Japanese pilots who survived the engagement reported encountering an American pilot whose skill matched or exceeded their best aces. The reports were initially dismissed as combat exaggeration. They were not. Over the next 2 weeks, Bong demonstrated that his first combat success was no fluke. On January 7, 1943, Allied coast watchers reported a Japanese convoy moving along the south shore of New Britain, heading west towards Salamaua. 48 American fighters scrambled to attack. Bong, flying with Lynch and 6 other P-38s, missed the initial rendezvous with P-40 fighter bombers, but ran directly into the convoy's air umbrella of Nakajima Key 43 Oscar fighters. The engagement lasted nearly 4 hours across 2 separate battles. In the first encounter at 15 hours, Bong engaged an Oscar in a 5-minute duel that showcased his tactical discipline. He refused to turn fight, instead using vertical maneuvers and speed to maintain advantage. When the Oscar pilot made a critical error, turning into Bong's pursuit instead of away, Bong closed to 50 yards and fired. The Oscar disintegrated. After refueling at Dobadura, Bong and the other P-38s took off for Leh, where they encountered 16 more Japanese fighters at 15:30 hours. Bong damaged 2 Oscars on his first pass, using the P-38's superior speed to blow through the formation. He then zoomed back to altitude, reset his attack, and destroyed 1 Oscar on his second pass. The next day, January 8, 1943, provided the engagement that officially made Bong an ace. While escorting bombers, 8 P-38s encountered approximately 20 Japanese fighters. The Japanese had numerical advantage and altitude. Standard doctrine suggested withdrawing to avoid unfavorable odds. Bong and his squadron mates attacked anyway. In the swirling dogfight that followed, Bong demonstrated the skills that would make him legendary. He shot down one fighter with a long burst from 200 yards, a difficult deflection shot that required precise lead calculations while both aircraft maneuvered violently. This kill, his 5th confirmed victory, earned Bong the designation of Fighter Ace and the Distinguished Flying Cross. More importantly, it announced to the Japanese that American pilots were learning to fight effectively in the Pacific. By April 1943, just 4 months into combat, Bong had shot down 10 Japanese aircraft, becoming a double ace. His reputation was growing not just among Americans but among Japanese pilots, who increasingly reported encounters with a twin boom fighter flown by a pilot of exceptional skill. The progression from novice to ace had been rapid but methodical. Each mission taught lessons that Bong carefully catalogued in his mind. He learned that the P-38's twin engines provided not just power but survival. On multiple occasions, pilots returned to base on a single engine after battle damage that would have destroyed single-engine fighters. He learned that altitude was life. The pilot who controlled the high ground controlled the engagement. He learned that patience was a weapon. The pilot who waited for the perfect shot succeeded where the impatient pilot failed. Between combat missions, Bong's role expanded beyond simply adding to his victory total. He became a teacher, sharing his hard-won knowledge with newly arrived pilots who stepped off transport planes green and terrified. He taught them to respect the Zero's capabilities without fearing them. He taught them to use their aircraft's strengths, speed, firepower, and ruggedness, while avoiding its weaknesses, sluggish low-speed handling and poor roll rate at high speeds. His teaching methods were practical and direct. He would take new pilots up on training flights and demonstrate proper attack sequences. Climb above the target. Position yourself so the sun is behind you, blinding the enemy. Dive at full throttle to build maximum speed. Align your nose, not for where the target is, but where it will be when your bullets arrive. Fire a short burst, no more than 3 seconds. Watch your tracers and adjust. When you pass through the target's altitude, keep diving. Use your speed to climb back up and reset for another attack. Never, under any circumstances, slow down and turn fight. The promotion to first lieutenant came in April 1943, recognition of both his combat success and his value as an instructor. But Bong was not satisfied with 10 kills. He had proven he could survive and succeed. Now he needed to prove he could dominate. But the engagement that would transform Bong from skilled ace to legendary fighter pilot occurred on July 26, 1943 over Lae, New Guinea. That morning, Bong led a flight of 10 P-38s on a sweep north of Lae when he spotted a Japanese formation of approximately 20 aircraft. The smart tactical move would be to radio for reinforcements and maintain altitude advantage until support arrived. Bong did not make the smart tactical move. He immediately led 3 successive attacks into the enemy formation. On his first pass, Bong destroyed 2 Japanese fighters with short, accurate bursts of fire. As he climbed back to altitude, 15 additional Japanese fighters arrived to reinforce the engagement. The odds were now more than 3-1 against the Americans. Most squadron leaders would have ordered withdrawal. Bong, disregarding the overwhelming enemy numbers, fearlessly led his flight back into the engagement. What followed was a masterclass in aerial combat. Bong destroyed 2 more aircraft in the second engagement, giving him 4 kills in a single mission. His wingmen described the action in after-action reports that still exist in military archives. Major Bong flew with absolute confidence. He positioned his aircraft precisely, fired only when assured of hits, and never wasted ammunition on low-probability shots. His situational awareness was extraordinary. He tracked multiple enemy aircraft simultaneously while maintaining perfect formation discipline with his wingmen. The engagement ended with 10 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 4 by Bong personally, with 0 American losses. For this action, Bong received the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest decoration for valor. The citation noted his extraordinary heroism and complete disregard for overwhelming enemy numbers. But the statistics alone cannot capture the psychological impact on Japanese pilots. Lieutenant Kenji Okamoto, a Zero pilot who survived the engagement, wrote in his diary that evening, words not discovered until Japanese military archives were opened, decades later. We encountered the American twin-boom fighter flown by the pilot, our intelligence calls the Ghost. He attacks from impossible angles with perfect precision. Our formation leaders now warn us specifically about this pilot. They say if you see the twin-boom fighter with red-painted wingtips and nose, disengage immediately. But disengagement is not always possible. The Ghost chooses when and where to fight. We can only react. By August 1943, Bong had achieved 15 confirmed kills and received promotion to captain. His fame was spreading not just through military channels but in American newspapers hungry for heroes. But Bong remained remarkably modest, uncomfortable with attention. In letters to his family, carefully preserved by his mother, he downplayed his achievements. I am doing my job like every other pilot out here. The P-38 is a magnificent aircraft. The real heroes are the ground crews who keep these planes flying in impossible conditions. This humility masked a lethal effectiveness born from careful analysis. After every mission, Bong debriefed thoroughly with intelligence officers. He studied gun camera footage frame by frame, not to celebrate his victories but to identify what he could improve. He noted that his best kills came when he closed to within 100 yards or less, sometimes as close as 50 yards. At that range, even brief bursts found their mark. He calculated that he averaged only 2 to 3 seconds of firing per kill, a testament to accuracy achieved through proper positioning rather than prolonged engagement. What separated Bong from other skilled pilots was his refusal to take unnecessary risks. He never chased damaged aircraft deep into enemy territory. He never allowed victory fever to override tactical judgment. If an engagement turned unfavorable, he disengaged without shame or hesitation. He understood that dead heroes were still dead, and living pilots could fight again, tomorrow. His squadron mates noticed something else about Bong's flying. He never lost a wingman. In the brutal mathematics of aerial combat, where many aces accumulated kills while their wingmen died protecting them, Bong's record was remarkable. He treated his wingmen as partners, not as expendable shields. He positioned them to support his attacks while keeping them out of maximum danger. He shared kills when his wingmen damaged aircraft that he finished off. This loyalty bred fierce devotion among those who flew with him. In November 1943, General Kenny ordered Bong back to the United States for 60 days leave. The general's reasoning was strategic. Bong had flown continuous combat for nearly a year. He needed rest. More importantly, his combat experience was invaluable for training replacement pilots and refining fighter doctrine. But there was another reason, though Kenny never stated it officially. Losing Bong in combat would be devastating to American morale. During his leave, Bong visited Superior State Teachers College for a homecoming event. There he met Marjorie Vattendahl, a beautiful and intelligent student who would transform his life in ways combat never could. The two began dating immediately, and when Bong returned to the Pacific in January 1944, he carried something precious. A large photograph of Marge that he had mounted on the nose of his P-38 Lightning. The aircraft was now named Marge in her honor. Unlike other pilots who adorned their aircraft with provocative nose art, Bong chose a respectful photograph of his girlfriend. His sister would later recall, he did not have the nude figures like some pilots. He had a beautiful girl instead. The red-painted wingtips and propeller spinners remained, distinctive markings that Japanese pilots had learned to recognize and fear. But fate intervened in March 1944. Another pilot, Second Lieutenant Thomas Malone, was flying Marge on a weather reconnaissance mission when the aircraft suffered engine failure over Papua New Guinea and crashed into a ravine. Malone bailed out safely, but Marge was gone, swallowed by the jungle that would hide her wreckage for 80 years. Bong mourned the loss of his namesake aircraft, but continued flying other P-38s, each one carrying Marge's photograph and his distinctive red markings. By April 1944, Bong had achieved 27 confirmed victories, surpassing Captain Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26 kills. Rickenbacker, America's previous ace of aces, sent Bong a personal letter of congratulations. "You have achieved what I always hoped another American pilot would accomplish. You have become the best of the best. Your skill and courage honor our Air Force and our nation." The national press seized on Bong's achievement. Newspapers across America proclaimed the modest pilot from Wisconsin as America's greatest fighter ace, Life. Magazine featured him in a photo spread. Radio programs broadcast interviews with him. Newsreel cameras followed his every move. The War Department, recognizing the propaganda value, promoted Bong to Major and sent him on a 15-state war bond tour. For 2 months, Bong visited training bases, gave speeches to overflow crowds, and helped sell millions of dollars in war bonds. He spoke at aircraft factories, encouraging workers that their efforts directly supported pilots like him in combat. He visited hospitals, talking quietly with wounded servicemen, offering encouragement without false optimism. He appeared at civic events where mayors presented him with keys to their cities and crowds cheered his every word. He hated every minute of it. In letters to Marge, Bong expressed his frustration. "I am not comfortable with attention and speeches. I belong in a cockpit, not on a stage. My squadron mates are still fighting while I tour the country. Every day away from combat is a day I date, fail my brothers in arms." The humility was genuine. Despite his record-breaking achievements, Bong saw himself as a pilot doing his job, nothing more. But the tour served its purpose. War bond sales surged wherever Bong appeared. Young men enlisted inspired by his example. Workers increased production knowing that real pilots like Bong depended on their efforts. The shy farm boy had become, against his will, a symbol of American fighting spirit. General Kenny understood this, even if Bong did not. The ace's value extended beyond the aircraft he personally shot down. He inspired thousands of others to fight harder, work longer, and sacrifice more. General Kenny understood Bong's feelings, but had a larger strategic concern. Bong's death in combat would devastate American morale. The solution was elegant. In September 1944, when Bong returned to the Pacific, Kenny assigned him to 5th Air Force Headquarters as an advanced gunnery instructor. The orders explicitly stated that Bong was permitted to fly missions but not to actively seek combat. He would train other pilots and improve fighter doctrine, critical work that kept him away from the most dangerous missions. Bong found the loophole immediately. The orders said he could not seek combat. They did not say he could not engage if combat found him. Flying from Tacloban on later, during the Philippines campaign, Bong managed to be in exactly the right place whenever Japanese aircraft appeared. His victory total climbed steadily. 28 kills, 30 kills, 35 kills. The Philippines campaign of late 1944 provided target-rich environments. Japanese air power, though greatly diminished from its 1942 strength, still mounted fierce resistance to MacArthur's return. Kamikaze attacks were beginning, desperate suicide missions that terrified American sailors but offered opportunities for fighter pilots like Bong, who could intercept the attackers before they reached the fleet. Each engagement was documented, filmed by gun cameras and verified by multiple witnesses. There was no inflation of claims, no exaggeration. Every kill was legitimate. Bong's gun camera footage, reviewed by intelligence officers, showed a consistent pattern: brief bursts of fire, typically 2 to 3 seconds. Targets at close range, often less than 100 yards. Immediate disengagement after firing, using speed to escape before other enemy fighters could react. It was methodical, efficient, deadly. As his total climbed toward 40, speculation grew about when he would be ordered home permanently. General Kenny walked a fine line. He wanted Bong to break records and boost morale, but he did not want to lose America's greatest ace to a lucky enemy shot. The solution was to gradually reduce Bong's missions while allowing him enough opportunities to reach 40 kills, a round number that would cement his legend. On December 12, 1944, General Douglas MacArthur personally presented Bong with the Medal of Honor at Tacloban Airfield on Leyte. MacArthur, known for dramatic speeches, discarded his prepared remarks and spoke from the heart. Major Richard Ira Bong, who has ruled the air from New Guinea to the Philippines, I now induct you into the society of the bravest of the brave, the wearers of the Congressional Medal of Honor of the United States. The ceremony took place on the very airfield where Bong had flown many of his final missions. Fighter aircraft lined the runway in the background. Hundreds of servicemen stood at attention in the tropical heat. MacArthur, wearing his trademark sunglasses and khaki uniform, presented the medal with rare, genuine emotion. He understood that Bong represented something larger than individual achievement. He was proof that American fighting men could match and exceed the best warriors any enemy could field. The ceremony was filmed and shown in newsreels across America. The modest pilot stood at attention, visibly uncomfortable with the attention, as MacArthur pinned the Medal of Honor on his uniform. The citation accompanying the medal was detailed and specific, listing his 40 victories, his leadership, his devotion to duty, and his extraordinary heroism. But it could not capture the full measure of what Bong had accomplished. He had not just shot down 40 aircraft, he had transformed American fighter tactics. He had trained hundreds of pilots. He had proven that skill and discipline could defeat numerical odds and experienced enemies. 5 days after receiving the Medal of Honor, on December 17, 1944, Bong achieved his 40th and final aerial victory over the Philippines. The engagement was typically efficient. Bong dove on a formation of Japanese fighters, destroyed one with a 3-second burst of fire, then climbed away before the other Japanese pilots could react. Gun camera footage showed the target aircraft exploding in mid-air, its pilot having no chance to bail out. It was kill number 40, a record that would never be broken by another American pilot. Behind the scenes, both MacArthur and Kenny agreed. Bong had done enough. With 40 kills and the Medal of Honor, he would be sent home permanently before combat could claim him. The decision was strategic and emotional. Losing Bong now would be a propaganda disaster and a personal tragedy. He had earned the right to survive. In January 1945, Major Richard Bong returned to the United States as America's most celebrated fighter pilot. The press coverage was intense. Every newspaper featured stories about the ace of aces. Radio programs interviewed him. Newsreels showed footage of his Medal of Honor ceremony. But what Americans wanted most was human interest. They wanted to know about Marge. On February 10, 1945, Richard Bong and Marjorie Vattendahl were married in Superior, Wisconsin. The wedding was press-and-sclés, front-page news across the nation. Hundreds of well-wishers attended. The ceremony was simple but elegant, reflecting both their small-town values and the genuine love they shared. The wedding took place at Concordia Lutheran Church in Superior. Marge wore a traditional white gown. Dick wore his Army Air Force's dress uniform, with his Medal of Honor prominently displayed. His squadron mates who could attend served as groomsmen. The church overflowed with family, friends, local residents, and reporters who documented every moment for a public hungry for good news after years of war. For Bong, who had spent 3 years in combat, the wedding represented normalcy, peace, and a future beyond war. In his wedding vows, witnessed by hundreds, he promised Marge a life free from the dangers he had faced. He spoke of building a home, starting a family, pursuing a career in aviation away from combat. The dreams were simple but profound for a man who had lived with death for 3 years. The reception was a joyous affair. Toasts were made, stories were told, laughter filled the room. For a few hours the war seemed distant. Bong danced with his new bride, smiled for photographs, and allowed himself to imagine a future where his greatest challenges would be civilian concerns, not life and death struggles at 20,000 feet. The couple honeymooned in California, where Bong had accepted a position as test pilot for Lockheed Aircraft Corporation. His combat experience made him invaluable for evaluating new fighter designs. He would help develop the next generation of American fighters, specifically the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. It seemed the perfect assignment for a pilot of Bong's caliber. Test flying offered challenge and excitement, without the mortal danger of combat. He could build a life with Marge while contributing to aviation advancement. But jet aircraft in 1945 were experimental and dangerous. The experimental technology was cutting edge, the performance unprecedented, but the reliability was questionable. Jet engines were temperamental, control systems were unfamiliar. Safety procedures were still being developed through trial and error. Every test flight carried risk. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Bong reported to Lockheed's Burbank facility for a routine acceptance flight of P-80, a tail number 4485048. He had accumulated 4 hours and 15 minutes of flight time in the P-80 across 12 flights. By test pilot standards, he was still familiarizing himself with the aircraft's characteristics. By combat pilot standards, he was comfortable and confident. The P-80 Shooting Star represented America's future in aviation. With a top speed of 594 miles per hour, it was significantly faster than any propeller-driven fighter. Its sleek design, with the jet engine buried in the fuselage and air intakes mounted in the fuselage sides, was revolutionary. But the technology was so new that procedures were still being refined through operational experience. Every test flight contributed to the growing body of knowledge about jet aircraft operations. The pre-flight inspection revealed nothing unusual. Bong started the single Allison J-33 turbojet engine normally. The jet engine's whine was markedly different from the roar of piston engines he had flown throughout his combat career. He taxied to runway 15 and received clearance for takeoff at 14:30 hours local time. Witnesses watched as the sleek jet began its takeoff roll. The acceleration was impressive, the P-80 reaching rotation speed quickly. Bong lifted off smoothly and began climbing. At approximately 300 feet altitude, witnesses noticed puffs of black smoke from the engine. The aircraft began rolling to the right, then leveled momentarily. The canopy separated and tumbled away. Bong had initiated ejection procedures. But then the engine failed completely. The P-80 pitched nose down into a steep descent. Bong ejected clear of the aircraft, but his altitude was critically low, perhaps 200 feet. The parachute deployed, its canopy snapping open. But there was insufficient time and altitude for the parachute to decelerate Bong's falling body. He struck the ground at high velocity at the intersection of Oxnard Street and Satsuma Avenue in Burbank. The P-80 impacted seconds later in a steep nose-down attitude, fuel exploding on impact. Emergency crews reached Bong within minutes, but he had died instantly from the impact. The investigation later determined that the primary fuel pump had malfunctioned during takeoff. A backup auxiliary pump was available, mounted on the cockpit's left side console. The pump could be activated by a switch that Bong would have had to locate and activate while dealing with engine failure, loss of control, and the decision to eject. The investigation could not determine whether Bong had forgotten to activate it in the emergency or was unable to reach the switch before ejecting. Another test pilot, Captain Ray Crawford, reported that Bong had mentioned forgetting to activate the auxiliary pump on an earlier flight when the primary pump failed temporarily. The oversight had been corrected in flight with no consequences, but test pilots were warned never to repeat such errors. In the unforgiving environment of experimental aircraft testing, there was often no second chance. The news of Bong's death reached the public on August 7, 1945. Newspapers across America placed the announcement prominently, many directly below headlines about the atomic bombing of Hiroshima the previous day. The cruel irony was inescapable. Major Richard Ira Bong survived 3 years of combat against the Japanese Imperial Air Force, flew more than 200 missions, engaged in hundreds of aerial battles, and emerged unscathed. Then he died testing an American aircraft in California on the same day the atomic bomb heralded the end of the war. Marge Bong was devastated. They had been married less than 6 months. Their life together was just beginning. In interviews decades later, she would speak about that day with pain that never fully healed. Dick survived everything the Japanese threw at him. He came home to me. We were going to build a life together. And then, in one moment, he was gone. The cruelty of it still haunts me. Chuck Yeager, who would become America's most famous test pilot by breaking the sound barrier 2 years later, wrote about Bong's death in his autobiography. He noted that test pilots of that era dealt with frequent deaths through anger rather than sorrow, a psychological defense mechanism to cope with the fearsome mortality rates. But Bong's death hit harder than most. He was supposed to survive. He had earned survival through skill and courage. His death seemed cosmically unfair. The funeral in Poplar, Wisconsin drew thousands of mourners. Military honor guards flanked the casket. General Kenny attended personally, his grief evident. Marge walked behind the casket, supported by family members, her face a mask of controlled anguish. The small farming community that had sent its favorite son to war received him back for burial, but not in the manner anyone had hoped. Major Richard Ira Bong was 24 years old. The legacy Bong left behind extended far beyond his record of 40 confirmed aerial victories. His tactics became standard curriculum at fighter pilot training schools. The techniques he pioneered, energy management, altitude advantage, boom and zoom attacks, close-range firing, became doctrine taught to every American fighter pilot for decades. He proved that American pilots, properly trained and equipped, could defeat the best Japan offered. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots proved equally significant. Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace who survived the war with 64 confirmed kills, spoke extensively about American pilots in post-war interviews. His assessment was brutally honest. The P-38 would patrol above the altitude at which the Zero could fly. Their great speed at high altitudes allowed them to maneuver into the most advantageous positions. Then the big fighters would plunge from the sky to smash into the hapless Zero fighters. The P-38s were in a most enviable position. They could choose to fight when and where they desired and on their own terms. Under such conditions, the Lightning became one of the most deadly of all enemy planes. The P-38 destroyed the morale of the Zero fighter pilot. The decorations Bong received during his short career reflected his extraordinary achievements. The Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 silver stars, 7 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 15 Air Medals. In total, 27 medals for valor and achievement. Yet those who knew him reported that his favorite phrase remained simple: "We are just doing our job." In the decades following World War II, Richard Bong was honored through numerous memorials. The airport at Superior, Wisconsin was named Richard Bong Airport. The Richard Verst Bong Veterans Historical Center opened in Superior, featuring exhibits about Bong and other American veterans. A Bong Memorial Room at Superior Central High School displays his uniform, medals, photographs, and memorabilia. Outside stands a restored P-38 Lightning, similar to the one Bong flew to glory. Streets, bridges, and buildings across America bear his name. In 1986, 41 years after his death, Richard Bong was posthumously inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. The ceremony brought together surviving members of his squadron, now elderly men who still remembered flying with him. Colonel Gerald Johnson, who flew with Bong in the 49th Fighter Group, spoke at the induction. "Dick Bong was the best pilot I ever knew. But that is not why we remember him. We remember him because he made everyone around him better. He taught us how to survive. He showed us that skill and discipline defeated raw aggression. He proved that determination and preparation could overcome any odds. We were honored to have flown with him." The discovery of Bong's crashed P-38 Marge in May 2024 brought closure to a story that had remained incomplete for 8 decades. On May 16, 2024, a joint expedition by the Richard I Bong Veterans Historical Centre and Pacific Rex discovered wreckage in a ravine in Papua New Guinea's Madang province. Justin Talon, director of Pacific Rex, described finding two engines partially buried in soil with red paint still visible on the propeller spinners. Bong's 99-year-old sister, Jerry Fechtelkotter, expressed happiness at the discovery. The statistics of Bong's combat career tell a story of unmatched achievement. 40 confirmed aerial victories, a record that stands today. More than 200 combat missions flown. Over 500 hours of combat flight time, 0 losses of wingmen under his direct leadership. These numbers establish Bong as not just America's top ace, but one of the most effective fighter pilots in history. Thomas Maguire, who flew with Bong and became America's second highest scoring ace with 38 kills, described what made Bong exceptional. Dick was never the flashiest pilot. He did not perform aerobatics in combat. He did not take unnecessary risks, but he positioned himself perfectly, fired at the exact right moment, and never wasted shots. He treated aerial combat like an engineering problem. Calculate the angles, close the distance, eliminate the target, disengage safely. It was methodology applied to chaos. In the 79 years since Bong's death, his record of 40 victories remains unbroken by any American pilot. This is not for lack of opportunity. American pilots fought in Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, and numerous other conflicts. But the nature of aerial warfare changed. Jet aircraft made engagements faster and shorter. Missiles replaced guns as primary weapons. Air superiority was often achieved quickly, limiting opportunities for pilots to accumulate high victory totals. Bong's record stands as a monument to a specific time and style of warfare that has passed into history. For Marge Bong, who later remarried and became Marge Drucker, her first husband remained a central part of her identity throughout her long life. She became a tireless advocate for veterans and military history education. She was instrumental in establishing the Richard I Veterans Historical Centre and worked to ensure Dick's legacy inspired future generations. In a letter written late in her life, Marge reflected on her brief marriage. World War II was a time in history that saw probably the most patriotic outpouring that the average citizen felt. Many people went through World War II and experienced all of this. They are alive today and they can pass their stories on to younger generations. Dick's favourite phrase was, "We are just doing our job." Well, with the Heritage Centre, we are doing our job by providing a very fitting tribute to all the heroes who came out of World War II. Richard Ira Bong flew his last combat mission on December 17, 1944. He died testing an experimental jet fighter on August 6, 1945. He lived only 24 years, was married for less than 6 months, and experienced combat for less than 3 years. Yet in that brief time, he changed aerial warfare, influenced tactical doctrine, inspired generations of fighter pilots, and became a permanent part of American military history. Major Richard Ira Bong earned 40 aerial victories in 3 years of combat, but his true achievement was greater. He demonstrated that analytical thinking and tactical discipline trumped raw aggression. He showed that technology meant nothing without skilled operators. He established standards of excellence that inspire still. The Japanese feared him with good reason. He was the best they ever faced. The pilot who ruled the skies from New Guinea to the Philippines. The ace of aces. America's deadliest fighter pilot.